speaker is Myer Siematycki. Myer is a professor of politics here at Ryerson University. He is the past founding director of Ryerson's master's degree program in Immigration and Settlement Studies and an associate of the Ryerson Center for Immigration and Settlement Studies. Myer's research explores immigrant and minority community civic engagement, and he's a frequent media commentator on urban and immigration issues. Myer will be followed by Avvy Go. Avvy is the clinic director of the Metro Toronto Chinese and Southeast Asian Legal Clinic. She was the president of the Chinese-Canadian National Council, Toronto chapter, where in 1989 in that role became involved in the redress for Chinese Head Tax and Exclusion Act. She later became co-counsel in the successful class action lawsuit seeking redress for the head taxpayers and their families. When Avvy is not doing her legal practice, she spends much of her time in community organizing and doing advocacy work, and in that role is a founding steering committee member of the Color Poverty, Color of Change Network. Myer, you're next.
The organizers for putting together this session. I'm very pleased to be here. I want all of you who are attending this session to know, for those of us who are speaking, and I'm sure for the organizers, how gratifying it is to have such a full house, to have so many people here who are committed to this issue. It speaks very well of our Ryerson community. It speaks very well of the broader Toronto community. I know many of you have come from off campus to against what is wrong, unfortunately, than to be applauding what is right. And I think we've already heard that we're in another one of those moments now where it is really important for voices that are concerned, that are critical of the initiatives of this government, to let their voices be heard. Like I'm sure many of you in the room, I have a personal connection to the theme of refugees in Canada. It was just about this time 64 years ago that my parents arrived in Canada as refugees, as Holocaust survivors. And basically they were not very much wanted back in their country of birth, nor were they very much wanted in this country of arrival. And I find it very, very sad and troubling that our government's approach to honoring its international commitments, its commitment to provide refuge to those who have a well-founded fear of persecution, is now being subverted and circumvented in the ways that Nathalie has described. So what I've been asked to do in my remarks is to provide a bit of a broader historical and kind of enlarge the lens on what's going on in immigration policy in this country, to put this piece of legislation into a larger context of where the government's been going. So I'm afraid I have even more depressing news to convey about what I think should trouble us about Canadian immigration policy in a whole variety of other areas. Nathalie has done me a favor of covering some of the ground on the historical front that I was going to, but I'm going to start in a way that a professor should not very often in a classroom, or certainly in a public address. I'm going to read from a textbook. And to make it even worse, at the risk of bringing back bad memories to many of my students who are here, yes, I am going to read from the textbook we have used, and of course I teach, The Making of the Mosaic. This is the standard text on immigration policy in Canada. It's got 700 pages. At the end, in a brief conclusion, this is what the authors want to convey as their most compelling finding. In fact, they say, for most of its history, Canada's immigration practices have been racist and exclusionary. We have built doors, we have locked those doors, and we have committed far more attention and resources to preventing arrivals in one way or another. As Nathalie has mentioned, something we've gotten too good at are apologies. So there is, as Nathalie had mentioned, a long list of things that governments in Canada have apologized for past transgressions in immigration. You've already heard. We have apologized for the Chinese head tax. We have apologized for the internment and subsequent deportation of Japanese Canadians. We've apologized for interning Ukrainians and Italians. There was an almost apology somewhere in a park in Vancouver, we're told, about the Komagata Maru. So that awaits a more public and formal apology, but words apparently did pass the lips of some representative of the Government of Canada. There also had been apologies to the descendants of tens of thousands of British children who over a 75-year period were brought to Canada, mostly to work on farms as literally indentured labor in agriculture. So the experience we know today of migration and indentured servitude being part of agricultural production in Canada has a very long history in this country. And I will echo Nathalie's comments that given how often we've gotten policy wrong in the past, it would be prudent for us to think about how appropriate future and ongoing and current policies that are on the books are. We're very good at apologizing decades later. We should be much better at making policies that won't require future apologies. Bill C-31, as you've heard, deals mostly with refugees. What I want to try to do, though, is sketch out a bit of a broader context of immigration policy in Canada and some of its problematic characteristics. And in particular, I want to highlight two trends that have occurred in the field of immigration selection and admission in Canada. One has to do with, and we don't talk about this enough, the significant proportional decline in the number of refugees that Canada admits as a proportion of all of the permanent residents it admits each year. So I want to say something about that. The second is something that Harold Bowder touched on, which is the huge, and I will say very problematic, reliance on temporary foreign workers as Canada's approach to meeting its economic and labor market needs. So let me talk about each of those 2 points. Broadly speaking, I think most of you know that Canada selects newcomers in one of 3 categories, either in the family class, the economic class, or the refugee class. The family class, of course, is based on family unification. The economic class is intended to promote Canada's economic well-being and labor market needs. The refugee class, we know, providing asylum and haven to those in fear of persecution. Let me share now with you some numbers that I think should unsettle all of us. Let me talk about the balance across those 3 classes over the past 25 years. In 1986, the distribution of who Canada admitted was as follows. The family class accounted for 43% of all admissions, the economic class 36%, the refugee class 19%. In 2010, here were the proportions. Family class 21.5%, that's a decline of 50%. The economic class 66.6%, that's a doubling. The refugee class fell to virtually its lowest in history, 8.8%. So any talk that we hear about Canada being generous, Canada being compassionate, I think does not hold up to those numbers and those trends. I would say, in fact, the Global South does far more than Canada does in providing refuge and haven for refugees, and they do that with far fewer resources than Canada has. I would go a step further and say, let's be honest with ourselves and just say our approach to immigration is selfish. We want immigrants who will perform and contribute based on our definition, and that then involves us in cherry picking some of the highest human capital from countries around the world that other countries have made major social investments into. And this was very clearly stated, not in Canada, mind you, but in Davos, Switzerland earlier in the year, when Prime Minister Harper said, Canada will make our economic and labor force needs the central goal of our immigration efforts in the future. The only footnote I'd add to that is there's nothing really very new in that. It's been going on for a long time, but boy, have they ever pressed the accelerator on that trend. I don't have a lot of time to make a next sort of segue little point I want to make, To add insult to injury, some of you may have been reading in the press the difficulties on family unification with providing access to parents and grandparents to return to Canada. This is, I think, close to in the category of scandal and deception. The Government of Canada announced that they would be putting a freeze on accepting more applications from grandparents and parents, but as compensation for that, they would provide super visas that people would be eligible for that would be good for 10 years. What we've found so far is there's a 25% rejection rate on those applications. There is no reason or rationale given. In some countries like India, Pakistan, and Kenya, the refusal rate runs between 40 and 50%. So there are a whole bunch of problems playing out in various areas. The last problem area I want to touch on is temporary foreign workers. Here, the message of the Government of Canada, to play off of our theme for today, is welcome to Canada, but get out of here before too long. Don't make it a long stay, because what Canada has done over the last number of decades is dramatically to increase the number of migrants it allows into the country on a temporary basis. These are people who must work for a given employer or in a given field. This is a total departure from Canada's past tradition of regarding migration not just in narrow economic terms, but also as a form of nation building. We have a very quick pathway to citizenship that has now been curtailed by this dramatic increase in temporary foreign workers. How significant? Well, in 1986, Canada admitted 80,000 temporary foreign workers, 80,000. In 2011, the number was up to 190,000 who were admitted in that 1 year. And because the length of stay has now been extended, a person as a temporary foreign worker can stay for a maximum of 4 years, and then by law they are required to leave, cannot come back for another 4 years. Because the stay has been elasticized to 4 years, this is the total. Let me now tell you the total number of temporary foreign workers who are in the country. 1986, 120,000, the total in the country. 2011, 300,000. Canada is admitting more temporary foreign workers each year than we are admitting immigrants under the economic class, even though, as I said earlier, we've dramatically increased the share that goes to the economic class. So the bottom line is, Canada is resorting to, I would say, the discredited European-style guest worker program as a means of providing pliable, vulnerable, cheap labor to employers as Canada's strategy for economic growth and development. And I don't think that's something that would sit very well with most Canadians.